Welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of crime, justice, and everything in between. I'm your host, JR, and with me today is Grace Ferrell, who has been on previous episodes, and she is a terrific student and terrific podcaster host. Hello again, Grace.
Hi, JR. Thanks for having me again on the podcast. I'm looking forward to today's episode.
And I just want to tell folks out there, if you haven't figured out by now, I'm from the southern part of the United States, okay? And so some of the words that I enunciate will not be as you might think they should. So please bear with me and be patient with me. The San Luis Valley in southern Colorado is one of the largest high desert valleys in the world. It is situated between the Sangre de Cristo mountain range on the east and the San Juan mountain range on the west. The valley is about the size of Connecticut, extending 125 miles long, 65 miles wide, with an altitude of over 7,000 feet. It sits on top of the Rio Grande Rift, and as you might think, yes, the main river is the Rio Grande.
The major attractions for vacationers to this area are all outdoor places. For example, the Great Sand Dunes National Park with the natural artesian hot spring swimming pool, Wolf Creek Ski Area, and Colorado's oldest church. The families and people who live in the San Luis Valley have been there for multiple generations. Farming and ranching are a way of life there. Towns with names like Alamosa, Creed, Monte Vista, and South Fork are in the valley.
In this area of Colorado, they have their share of crime, but overall it's lower than any other parts of Colorado, especially in the larger cities of Colorado. Law enforcement agencies in the San Luis Valley, like the Castilla County Sheriff's Office, face difficulties in attracting and retaining qualified personnel because of the low pay and the remote location. I mean, really, if you've ever been in that area, you're out in the middle of nowhere, okay? You could get lost out there and people would never find you. As a matter of fact, Grace, people go there just to get lost, okay? So people can't find them, all right?
Yeah, from the pictures, it looked
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Some smaller agencies have had to hire less than desirable candidates. And of course, we know that's bad. That leads to internal issues, challenges in working with the district attorney's office and the community. Between August and October of 2020, 5 people in the San Luis Valley were killed.
So today, JR and I will chat with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, or CBI agent Gregg Slater, who worked on the task force to identify the killer. He will enlighten us on how the investigation unfolded and how eventually the perpetrators were identified and arrested. Gregg Slater has been in the law enforcement profession for over 40 years. While Gregg has experience in detention, civil processes, executive protection, court security, patrol, internal affairs, much of his career has been with major crimes investigations and SWAT. Currently, Gregg is the agent in charge for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Denver Regional Office Major Crimes Unit. Welcome to the show, Gregg.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. First of all, a little bit about the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, or CBI. We are an organization that is similar in some respects to the FBI, but on a state level. Obviously, we don't get into a lot of the investigations that the FBI gets involved in, national security, things of that nature, but where we are similar to the FBI is that we are a request agency only. In other words, by statute, CBI is allowed to initiate investigations into organized crime cases, fugitive cases, and now just recently in the last year, gun violation cases. Any other type of investigation that CBI gets into has to be requested either by a sheriff's office, police department, DA's office, the attorney general, or the governor himself. We have 3 regional offices, one in Denver, one in Pueblo, one in Grand Junction. So the state is divided into 3 regional offices, and our area of responsibilities are fairly large. We have a forensic science unit as well that's separate from investigations, but primarily, since we're going to be talking about a criminal case, I'm just going to kind of focus in on investigations. In 2020, I was working in the Pueblo office. I'm now in the Denver office, but in 2020, I was working in the Pueblo office in the major crime unit, and our area of responsibility went essentially from the El Paso County, Douglas County line south to the border, as far east as Oklahoma and Kansas to the east, and west we would go to Pagosa Springs. So we have a large area of responsibility. The area where this particular event took place was in the San Luis Valley. That would include Alamos, Neos, Castillo, Rio Grande. Those are the counties, a couple of other Saguache County. And how this all started was back in August of 2020, there was a young lady by the name of Karina Arroyo, who was a resident, a small town just west of Alamosa in Monte Vista. Monte Vista is right between Rio Grande County and Alamosa County. It's a small jurisdiction, but Karina had gone missing. Karina had suffered drug and alcohol addiction issues. She really didn't have a place to stay, but she would use her grandparents' home. So the family would allow her to come into the house at night. They'd keep the door unlocked, keep a plate of food there. She would come in, grab something to eat, and typically take off. There were times in Karina's life that she dried out, if you will. But in this particular time, Karina had pretty much fallen off the wagon and was back into using drugs and alcohol. So she goes missing towards the end of August. And at the time she went missing, in Colorado, it's a little different in that an agency will take a missing persons report. There's not a whole heck of a lot of investigation that goes on in those missing person reports by law enforcement. They typically just check to make sure the individual has not been picked up by a law enforcement agency. They may or may not call local hospitals. We can't call any rehab centers because those are HIPAA protected, so we wouldn't know if she was there. But there's just some basic work that goes on in that. The chief of police at the time was a gentleman by the name of George Dingfield. And George was prior to being the chief of police in Monte Vista, he was a major for the state patrol and worked in that particular area. So everybody knew George. George and CBI worked very closely together on other homicides and other cases while he was chief in Monte Vista. George had called us and requested assistance from us in this case because 3 days after Karina went missing, there was a young girl by the name of Selena Escobar who went missing in Alamosa. Selena was a juvenile at the time. I think she was 17 years old, and she had gone missing. And there seemed to be some parallels in the investigation. Early on, there was rumors floating around the valley down there that Karina had been killed and her body was out somewhere in the desert. So to give you kind of a quick landscape or idea of the landscape of that area, it's agricultural, a lot of land, very dry. Predominantly you have potato fields, onion fields, things of that nature. It's really dry and arid, it's hot. It's right in the middle of a valley between two mountain ridges and whatnot. So, and not that far from the Mexico-Colorado border. So it's not uncommon that you could just go out and be lost out in that area. There's a lot of open area that is uninhabitable. And we were getting information that Karina may have been killed. We had gotten some information too that she may have been involved with this guy by the name of Psycho. That was his street name. He was known to Alamosa PD as an individual in their community that was involved in drugs and guns. But there wasn't enough information at that time to really focus in on Psycho. So we kind of began this joint investigation. And to be very candid, there was a breakdown in communication. Some law enforcement agencies are very protective. I think all are very protective. They don't like to share information typically for whatever reason. In my 42 years of doing this job, I have to tell you that the best way to solve a crime is through communication. Talking to other agencies, having contacts in those other agencies, respecting the fact that there's things that shouldn't be said that will stay within the four walls of the area that you're holding your meetings and exchanging information. But we had some issues with that. We weren't being provided a lot of information that was being done through the agencies involved. So we're a little bit behind the eight ball. We just simply were doing our due diligence, going through a particular protocol that we had developed on, where are we going to begin to look for a missing person? How are we going to do that? So we have this little checklist that my partner and I, Chris Adams, have that we started to go down. We were checking hospitals. We were checking NCIC and CCIC to see the last time Karina may have been contacted by law enforcement, where she had been contacted. We were reaching out to the local hospitals. We were reaching out to other jurisdictions. Rumors were coming in that she had been picked up and was being human trafficked at the time. Human trafficking down in that area was not known to be a huge issue. So we really didn't have a lot of information at the time. As the investigation went on, we've moved into early October. We get a call from the Saguache County Sheriff, Dan Warwick, requesting assistance in a missing person by the name of Zevin Garcia. Zevin was a resident Saguache County. He kind of lived in this area known as Crestone, on the border of Crestone. Crestone is a unique area that butts up against the San Cristos. It is known for, quite frankly, a lot of drug use. It's where people go to hide. I would imagine a lot of the individuals listening to this are too young to know what a hippie is. But this is back in my day, and I think JR's day. This is, your typical Woodstock concert type individuals. And you can look that up on the internet and see how big Woodstock was and the type of people. A lot of love, a lot of happiness. Life is just about having fun. This was a place you would go to get lost. A lot of UFO interest and sightings, things of that nature. So Zevin was known.
Yeah, we would say peace, love, and everyone just be.
Yep, exactly. You got it. So Zevin was known in that community, and it was on October 22nd of 2020 that Zevin's mother, who was living out of the country at the time, reported him missing. We were requested by Sheriff Warwick to investigate this because we had learned some information between when Serena and Karina went missing that Psycho was involved. His name is Adre Baroz, was involved. We didn't have enough physical evidence. We didn't have a lot of tangible evidence at all. It was just a lot of word of mouth, a lot of hearsay, a lot of rumors, things of that nature. We knew that Baroz had been arrested in the early weeks of September after Selena went missing for drugs and a weapons charge. I don't know where a lot of your listeners are from or live or work, but here in Colorado, we have preset bonds for offenses. You would like to think that drugs and gun charges would have a high bond, but they really don't. And you have to understand too, this is in the beginning phases of COVID. So there's a lot of people that are not going to be hanging around. They don't want to fill up jails, things of that nature. So we knew that Baroz had been arrested and had been released. We still didn't have any idea where Selena or Karina were. They had broken all communications. Cellular phone information was not very helpful. What it did show was that they were both kind of in the area of downtown Alamosa at a particular hotel, kind of in that area. We didn't have a lot of pinpoint stuff because, as you all may or may not know, cell phone companies will not keep a lot of information, specifically location information. You're lucky if you can get 10 days after 10 days, you're going to lose a lot of your location data. So one of the big things that's important is if you're beginning an investigation into a missing person, you think that there is a criminal activity involved in the missing investigation, the missing person, then if you have their phone numbers, make sure you preserve those phone numbers to include data location, location to tower, incoming, outgoing calls, text messages, things of that nature. The big thing is the location to tower. You can get a hit on your, what they call CDRs, the call detail records, that will indicate what tower the phone is hitting on. But if you are not specific in your preservation letter stating that you want to know what is the distance between the phone and the tower when it connects, you're losing information.
Oh, wow. That's important information. I'm glad you said that for our students to know, because a lot of people probably didn't understand, know that would be the case. You have to be very specific in what you want them to preserve.
In addition, it's important to also preserve any social media accounts, because you might be able to get, especially through Google, you may be able to get some location data when they logged into their social media, where their social media was last used, things of that nature. So again, you're going to want location information in those preservation letters. So the big thing is when you're in the initial phases of an investigation where you think there's nefarious activity going on, preserve your social media, preserve your cell phone information. So we had that idea. As we began to look into Zevin's disappearance, again, please understand that communication between some agencies were not very, very good. There was a lack of sharing of information.
I have a question, Greg. Sorry, I hate
Yes,
to
sir.
cut you off, but I know from my experience, but a lot of our listeners may not. A lot of police departments, they like their own autonomy, they like their own jurisdictional area, and they don't like to share a lot of information with other agencies outside their jurisdiction. Is that the case here?
That's exactly what it is. And a lot of it is just egos. Let's be honest. People want the limelight. They want to, for whatever reason, they want to be the big cheese. They want to be the top dog and say, I did this. And the biggest thing that your listeners need to understand, especially if they're just getting in this profession, no one person solves a case. Any kind of case is a group effort. It's a team effort. It takes everybody working together in various disciplines, various expertise, various strengths to put a case together. So it's the best case that can be presented to a district attorney or state's attorney, whatever, and they can prosecute. We have to stay in our lanes. Our job in law enforcement is to put together the best case we possibly can. It is the job of the state's attorney or the district attorney, whatever is in your jurisdiction. It's their job to prosecute the case and determine what charges are going to be filed against. Everybody work together, put egos aside, accept mistakes, accept when you screw up, and just keep moving forward.
At this point, did they know that these murders were correlated in a way? Is that maybe why information wasn't being shared, or was it, again, just kind of an ego thing like you were talking about?
We had information that there was a very good likelihood that these, especially Selena and Karina, were connected. Selena and Karina did not know one another that we are aware of, but there was a common denominator, and that was Psycho. So we had that information. At the time Zevin gets involved, we didn't know what connection that may have been until we started doing the investigation.
Okay.
So as far as them not sharing it, there's a reason, but it's really not appropriate to discuss this, in this type of setting. But just suffice to say that there was not being information shared that should have been shared. And it was putting people behind the 8 ball.
Yeah.
And please interrupt me anytime you have questions. So Zevin's mom reports him missing. We go and do an interview with a friend of Zevin's, and we learn that Zevin was working for Psycho. Psycho was distributing meth, and we learned that Zevin and Psycho were actually in the Alamosa County Jail together back in September. Psycho was released on bond and then helped bond out Zevin. So now Zevin owed Psycho. Some of the things that Psycho was involved with besides the distribution of drugs was also stealing property, equipment from sites, construction sites, and things of that nature. So one of the things that was stolen by Zevin at the request of Psycho was a bobcat. I don't know if you guys are familiar with a bobcat, but it's just a small tractor with a front end scoop that you can scoop stuff up. So Zevin stole a bobcat from a property in Saguache and then brought that down to one of 2 locations in a place called La Salsa, which is south of Alamosa. It's still in Alamosa. It's still in that area, but in a county called Conejos County. So we learned that Zevin had been selling drugs for Psycho, and we also learned through interviews that Psycho owed Zevin money. So Zevin, the night he went missing, had told his buddy that he was going to go down and meet Psycho and get paid and get another supply of drugs to sell. Zevin had borrowed a truck from a friend, a female friend of his, and drove down to Alamosa to the hotel and they called it the hotel. It was actually an apartment. It was no hotel that they turned into an apartment, but they had gone down there and they met with Psycho, or he went down there to meet with Psycho and learned that Psycho was down in Las Osas at a guy named Ramirez's property. They called him Little Punch. So Zevin goes down there, and we know through cellular phone data, specifically tower hits, that Zevin gets down to the property in Conejos County at about 2 o'clock in the morning and is never heard from again. Zevin's phone stops pinging at 2 o'clock in the morning, approximately that time. Zevin is never heard from or seen again. So at this point in time, we are thinking that, okay, this could be another issue. This could be another victim of Psycho. We're trying to put together the case. We're still working on things. We know that the vehicle that Zevin had borrowed had not been returned. The whereabouts of that were unknown. There's a lot of things in law enforcement that we have today that we didn't have as much back in 2020, and that's license plate readers, or LPRs. So LPRs can be fixed in a fixed position, or they can be in law enforcement cars. There were no LPRs in Alamosa County or any of the surrounding counties there at the time. So we really couldn't track the vehicle through the license plate. All we knew is this vehicle was missing and had not been returned. The registered owner of the truck was not very cooperative. Quite frankly, we couldn't even find her because she was hiding. There was a lot of fear that was going on in that community that knew Psycho and had dealt with Psycho. Additional rumors in October were that another guy may be missing by the name of Myron Martinez. Myron was a distributor for Psycho back in the day. Myron was also a registered sex offender and had gone to prison and gotten out. We knew from information through other sources, doing interviews and whatnot, that Myron and Psycho had a falling out at some point because Myron had taken Psycho up to Colorado Springs, which is about a 2-hour drive northeast Alamosa, to pick up some drugs. Myron got pissed at Psycho, dropped him off, and left. So that pissed Psycho off pretty bad. So at this point in time, we're still working together. We now have brought in Conejos County Sheriff's Office. Their resources are limited, just like Monte Vista's are, and many of those other agencies in that area.
Think a minute here that whenever Psycho was arrested in early September, I did hear it was on drug and gun charges or weapon charges. So did they seize any weapons? And if so, were those weapons still in the police custody during this time that you're talking about right now?
They were. But
okay.
As you well know, the offenders are able to pick up guns anywhere they want.
Oh, absolutely.
But I have to be frank that there were weapons involved in this, and I'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay.
But again, he had access to other weapons other than the ones that were taken from him when he was arrested. We're continuing the investigation. We're working together a little more. A lot of the leads that were being generated were not successful. They didn't pan out. We would eventually meet up with a guy by the name of Hunter Peterson and his girlfriend, and her name escapes me. But Hunter was a lifelong resident of Alamosa. I think it's his grandmother was a former state trooper who cared for him. But Hunter, we would find he and his girlfriend, Hunter had warrants at the time, and we made an agreement with the district attorney that we would not arrest Hunter on his warrants. They were non-violent related offenses. So we did not arrest Hunter, but we were able to get an interview with Hunter and learn that he was living in Psycho's apartment with his girlfriend. It's not a very big apartment. There was a bedroom, and then there was an area that would be considered like a dining room area that they had built a little loft in that Hunter and his girlfriend would stay in. But essentially, he witnessed Karina's murder. He would tell us that Karina had come over and that he was present. Karina came in there and Psycho shot her with a crossbow and she died.
Wow.
Hunter apparently left and doesn't know what happened to her remains. The last time he saw Karina, she was in the bathroom where she was shot with the crossbow and in a bathtub. Or he had to take his girlfriend to work, and where he claims and doesn't go back When he finally does go home with his girlfriend, he notices a very strong odor of bleach. There was no blood, and Karina, Psycho were not there anymore.
He witnesses a possible murder there, witnesses a murder, and then just takes his girlfriend, like nothing happened to work, and then picks her up later and comes back home.
Yeah. Hunter was about as forthcoming as most individuals that your group will encounter in their career, and they will provide just enough information to keep them out of hot water.
Exactly.
It's not going to always be the truth. There's going to be some truth intermingled, and that's the big thing to kind of accept, that when you do interview an individual or individuals that are either witnesses or participants in a criminal event, the majority of the time they will provide you information, and that information is just going to be self-serving. It's not going to have all the details. It'll have just enough information to show that they're cooperating, and that's it. So you have to take a lot of it with a grain of salt, but you also have to use the information they provide you to go out and further corroborate that and find other leads. So Hunter provided us with this information.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so he didn't get any type of association with it whatsoever. He just gave you enough information to say this could have happened. I might have been there, but I'm not sure.
Correct. There is no law that says you have to report an incident.
Oh,
Colorado. Okay. So Hunter, you can't, he was not an accessory. However, he did provide enough information that we had some work to do, and we continue to do that work. As we got information from Hunter, it's now into November, and we have been requested by the Rio Grande County Sheriff's Office to investigate a missing person by the name of Myron Martinez. We had talked about Myron. Also missing was a gal that was associated to Myron, his girlfriend, Shayla Hamill. Shayla was actually married. Her husband was in prison in Florida. Her 2 children were living with her mother in Saguache County. Unfortunately, Shayla had a drug problem as well, and she and Myron were hanging out. We know through the Rio Grande County Sheriff's Office that Myron was reported missing by his father, Robert, who has since passed away, and had not been to his parole officer as well, and had a warrant for a parole violation. We know that Myron's father had gone to the house, and the car that was in Myron's driveway wasn't Myron's. It was similar to Myron's, but it was actually driven by Shayla and happened to be a friend of Shayla's car. So Myron's car was missing, but this other car was there. We towed the car, we inventoried it. There wasn't a whole lot of stuff in there. There was obviously clothing that belonged to both Myron and Shayla and whatnot. So we now have a total of 5 people missing. We have Karina missing, Selena missing. We also have Zevin missing, Myron, and Shayla. We would subsequently learn, now that we've got all these investigations going on through Hunter, that his girlfriend was actually present when Selena went missing. Selena happened to be staying in the same apartment complex at another apartment with another offender and his girlfriend or wife, whatever you want to call it. Hunter's girlfriend would tell us that Psycho saw Selena and had an intimate relationship with her. A couple days later, he sees her again in the hallway and says, "Hey, come on down here." She's a little apprehensive about coming down, but she does. And as soon as she gets to the door of Psycho's apartment, he hits her in the face, and he starts beefing her about rumors he is hearing on the street that she is spreading about his involvement in Karina, and then sexually assaulting her, Selena. You have an adult, you have a juvenile. So you have sex assault on a child in Colorado. So he was beefing her about that. Hunter's girlfriend would tell us that Psycho had hit her a few times, and then they took her in a car and left and didn't know where she was and never saw her again. So we now have information that between Hunter and his girlfriend, that now we can kind of piece together that Psycho is involved in both Karina's disappearance and Selena's disappearance. As far as Zevin is concerned, we would later learn from Hunter and his girlfriend that after Selena and Karina were killed, they left the hotel apartment complex and were staying down on one of the properties in Las Casas. There were two properties down there right off of County Road 28. As the crow flies, they're probably a mile apart, but driving, they're a couple miles apart. One of the places was rented by his buddy Ponch, Little Ponch. The other was a property that was owned by a family up in Denver that was basically abandoned. They hadn't been in there for years and whatnot, and their grandson allowed Psycho to go stay there, so he did. And it's a wooden floor. There's one part of the floor that's nothing but dirt, things of that nature. It's pretty much just a crap hole. But uniquely on both properties are burn pits. So as we're now interviewing Hunter and his girlfriend for a second time, we learn that they were down at Ponch's property, and both Hunter and his girlfriend would claim that Psycho was there, Little Ponch was there, and a guy by the name of CJ Dominguez shows up. And Zevin pulls up in the truck, and as soon as Zevin pulls up in the truck and gets out of the truck, Psycho goes, "Hey, is your cell phone on?" And Zevin says no, at which point Psycho pulls out a gun and shoots Zevin. Zevin falls to the ground. Psycho walks up to Zevin. Zevin's kind of pleading for his life, and Psycho shoots and kills him. They then drag his body into the burn pit and start burning Zevin. Hunter would tell us that he did not participate in that, but all night long he would just see large flames coming from the burn pit. He would also say that they moved the truck that Zevin drove down in to the other abandoned property where they would cut it up and try to bury it. Based on the information that Hunter had provided, as well as information that one of the other jurisdictions that wasn't providing much information had obtained, they were able to get a search warrant for the abandoned property. CBI did. Not only did we get a search warrant, but I had also gone out and contacted the actual owners of the property here in Denver, and they gave us consent. Now, the reason we both got consent and a search warrant was, even though we had consent, we could go onto the property. It just makes it cleaner if you have a search warrant. Because at the time, we really didn't know that the owner's grandson had anything to do with this. We never charged him. They stopped cooperating. And we went out there, and on the property, we found buried the front cab of the truck that Zevin was in. And we also found the bed of the truck. We found stuff inside the house that belonged to Baroz, that we could associate to Baroz, as well as one of his girlfriends. And we found in the burn pit human remains. And when I say human remains, they're nothing but bone. That was it. As a side note, I've done some research. To burn a human body, you have to have consistently, I think it's 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit to burn the body. And that's if it's in an enclosed area. This is an outside area. To burn a body where there is nothing on it, no flesh, no muscle, no grizzle, nothing, requires a lot of work. So in this particular pit, we found a number of bones, one that included a jawbone that had a tooth that had some teeth in it, also found a barbell piercing. Oddly, we found shower curtain loops in there. We collected all that. We found no other remains in there but one remain. We then learned that one of the agencies had talked to what they call a source of information, who they refused to provide her name, had told them that they were present when Selena was killed, and she was killed on that property, Little Ponch's property, that's about a mile as the crow flies away from the abandoned property. They were able to get a search warrant for that property. A couple days after we finished up, like the following day after we finished up the search on the abandoned property, we then executed a search warrant at the Little Ponch's property and found a larger burn pit. And in that burn pit was a number of bones. Again, all the bone had been completely burned. There was no flesh or anything on there. We found a jawbone in that as well. Based on these findings, the Alamosa Police Department obtained an arrest warrant for Psycho, along with Little Ponch and CJ Dominguez. They would eventually find Psycho in New Mexico. He had fled and he was extradited back. He never talked or anything. We were in the burn pits for days. It's a meticulous process. And it was literally just standing in trash, box springs, and bones. We would send those bones off to a forensic anthropologist. Her name is Diane France. Diane is a world-renowned forensic pathologist and an expert. She confirmed that in these pits, specifically in the burn pit on Little Ponch's property, there were more than one human remain worth of bones found in there. Diane was able to determine that there were a total between the burn pit at the abandoned property and Little Ponch's, a total of 7 bodies. Of those 7 bodies, we were only able to identify 2. One was Myron Martinez, the other was Shayla Hamill. Shayla's remains were found in the abandoned property burn pit. Myron's were found in the burn pit at Little Ponch's. And the way we were able to do that was through an odontologist. An odontologist is a dentist. A forensic odontologist is able to look at x-rays and compare x-rays to the bone and teeth that you find, identify a body that way. We were able to get Shayla's dental records from Pennsylvania, and Myron had, when he was in prison, had a root canal, and we were able to get his dental work from the Department of Corrections.
They were be able to determine that there were 7 bodies in those between those 2 burn pits, but only was able to identify 2 of those 7 bodies at this time in the investigation.
Correct. And we have never been able to identify any other remains.
Wow.
We even tried DNA. The one thing with heat destroys DNA, but DNA is also maintained in your bone marrow. And the bone around your marrow acts as a shield. We were able to obtain profiles of these individuals, of these bones, and determine that there are bones of basically 7 people in there. But there's not enough material to obtain a full DNA profile. We were able to use CODIS. There's 3 different types of CODIS. There's local CODIS, state CODIS, and the national CODIS database. They all have different levels of criteria. The national CODIS requires a great deal of criteria. They're very strict. You have to have so many loci to be able to enter a profile into the national CODIS database.
One I think requires 16, I thought.
Correct.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. Each states have a different level of loci, and each local office has a different criteria. So there's 3 different levels of criteria for entry into CODIS, because there's a local CODA, a state CODIS, and then the national CODIS. Does that make sense? So long and short is we have never been able to obtain a DNA profile, a DNA hit from anything in CODIS, be it local, state, or the national database. We could probably do familial DNA. We could probably try that. That's a very arduous process. It's an expensive process. Our lab at CBI does not have some of the capabilities, but we do have some capabilities of doing that and are doing that work right now.
I have another question there. Were there other people reported missing prior to this and during this investigation remains may belong to, but you just can't?
There were other people, but nothing that was in that time frame.
Okay.
So we don't know where these people are from.
Okay.
So Psycho was arrested. Also, Chris and I went to interview Little Ponch because he was arrested on some drug charges. We were doing surveillance on people at this time. And Little Ponch was related to Baroz, I believe, I think they may have been cousins. Psycho's brother, Julius, was involved as well. While they were following Little Ponch around, they saw him do a drug deal. So he was arrested on drug charges. And we found drugs in his car. We also found blood in his car. None of that blood matched the blood of any profiles that we had for any of the victims. That brings up a point. When we are investigating a missing persons case, we will get swabs from family members, or we will try to find like a toothbrush, a hairbrush that belong to the victim so that we can get a profile of the victim. In this case, we didn't have anything other than family buccal swab. So mom and dad produce a profile. From that profile, we would be able to determine if we find human remains, unidentified human remains, and we're able to obtain a DNA profile from those unidentified remains, we would be able to compare those to known standards of that victim's family. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So we had all that, and again, we were never able to to corroborate that. We would go and interview Ponch, and he admitted to participating. He admitted to participating or being present for several of the deaths. The one that really helped us the most was for Myron and Shayla. As I had mentioned, Myron had worked for Psycho in the past, distributing drugs, driving him around. Myron got out of prison, was in need of some meth, so he reached out to Psycho. Psycho said, yeah, come on over, man. You can come over to my place. So Myron is driving over to Psycho's place with him, and unbeknownst to anybody, was Shayla. While Shayla remained in the car, parked in the alley, Myron goes up to the apartment where Julius Baroz and Psycho Baroz are there. Long story short, they murder Myron in the apartment. They also will call CJ Dominguez and Little Ponch to go and pick up some particular items to conceal Myron's body. They cut Myron's body up and stuck him in tote, and then transported that down to Little Ponch's property. But in the meantime, while they're all there cutting him up and cleaning up, Psycho tells CJ to go move Myron's car. When he does, he finds Shayla in the car. Shayla is now a witness. They've got to get rid of her. So Psycho drives Myron's car down to the abandoned property with Shayla, while CJ and Little Ponch drive Myron's body down to Little Ponch's property, put him there, and burn him there. We know through conversations with the source of information, who happened to be Psycho's girlfriend at the time. Psycho was married but had a girlfriend, that she was present, that Psycho essentially kept Shayla high and then murdered her in the bathtub of that abandoned property and then burned her. We would find blood in the bathroom of that abandoned property that did match the blood of Shayla. So Shayla was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Did you find any other DNA from Myron?
Yes. So back in the hotel, we did collect blood underneath the floorboard and stuff like that did come back to Myron, as well as Karina. I don't remember if Selena's was there. But the interesting thing was, after Psycho is arrested, the apartment complex that he lived in was burned down. So his friends went and torched the place. We had already been there, though, and collected evidence, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But this is the lengths that they went to try to hide evidence and conceal evidence or destroy evidence. So all told together, we had enough information that we charged Psycho with all 5 murders. We charged his brother, Julius, with the murder of Myron. I think he was also charged with one of the other girls, because we know both we know Selena went out to CJ's property in a place called Antonito, which is in Conejos County. They may have killed her there, who knows? There's rumors CJ, Little Ponch, and Psycho, after they killed her, actually ate some of Selena. Never been able to corroborate that. It was fortunate because we had these sources of information that were providing information that was used and whatnot. And right before we were to have a trial, Psycho decides that he is going to plead guilty to all 5 counts, as long as his brother's only given 1 count of murder. It's not first-degree murder, it's second-degree murder. CJ was given a deal, and a Little Ponch, he wasn't given anything, but he got, I think it was 32 years in prison. So at this point, everybody is in prison. CJ is up for parole here pretty soon. Whether or not he makes his first parole, who knows, because he cooperated and provided some information. And for that cooperation, I think he was tampering with deceased human remains, which is a felony. I think he got 5 to 10 years, something like that. The big things that I think it's important to understand about this is that communication is huge. Places where we screwed up were law enforcement not communicating with one another. To this day, we still learn things that we weren't told. People couldn't bury hatchets from prior experiences. I think we did a pretty good job but could have done a better job with the electronic portion of the investigation. I think we lapsed a little bit in that, the timeliness of it. We had rumors that, again, Myron was missing, but no report had been taken. We probably could have done a little bit better job due diligence-wise with that. We would later find Myron's car. So after they drive Shayla down to the property, they go and dump the car on a rural highway way out in another county called Conejos. And people had shot it up and whatnot, but we did find some evidence in there. We would later learn that a Conejos County deputy actually towed the vehicle, but didn't run the license plate properly. We had the property entered as missing or stolen and probably could have found that vehicle a good 3 months before we found it. Would we have found some better evidence in it at the time? Maybe, who knows? But we were able to eventually find Myron's vehicle. The big thing again was cooperation. And at the time we had some issues with our prosecutor. It was a very contentious election back in 2020. The district attorney at the time was running against another member of his political party. That did not get the nod from the political party. The guy that was running against him, his name is Alonzo Payne. Alonzo Payne was running against the incumbent and won the primary, so he was elected into office. When we went to discuss this case with the attorney, the district attorney, Bob Willett at the time, he said, listen, I've been, trying to get assistance from the attorney general's office. We're not getting any. There's going to be a new DA. You just need to wait for the new DA to come in. When the new DA came in, he agreed that there was just too much to do. So we had special prosecutors out of the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, Ken Kumpfner and Fred Johnson, two incredibly intelligent and just prosecutors I've ever worked with, prosecuted the case and were able to secure the deals that we were able to. But we had a lot of issues in the interim with the district attorney's office. Those were all eventually ironed out, but that was a complication as well. So no investigation goes unscathed. You just have to persevere. You have to play with the cards that you're dealt with. The big thing again, and I'll keep reiterating, is just interagency cooperation, working with the people that are investigating the case from other jurisdictions. Everybody's got to work it together. Put your egos aside and work together as a team. Any questions?
He answered all of my questions.
Oh, great job, Greg. I do have a question or two here.
Sure.
One is, did you say that you are doing some familial testing to try to determine possibly these other 5 individuals that might be missing? Or did I hear that that's too expensive and it's just kind of where it's at?
I don't want to put it is expensive. We would probably do it if necessary, but no, we are not doing that. We believe that Myron's remains are in there. We believe that, Karina and Selena's remains are in there as well. But the lab, to my knowledge, there has been no additional work done on determining or trying to determine whether or not we have sufficient DNA to go forward with familial exam. I don't know if we're going to do that or not. I don't know if we have the capability of doing it. It's not as easy as the media and TV portray it to be.
Well,
there's only 3 outside agencies. If your agency doesn't do what they call SNP testing, they have to actually snip the DNA to make sure there is enough to actually send off to another lab. One of 3 labs that we use in Colorado, we contract out with because they have the same or similar standards that we have. There just may not be enough material to be able to do that. And when I talk about these bones, I mean, they are just, there's nothing on them, nothing.
Right. But you do still have those bones, and what marrow is in there, is there.
Correct.
But, okay.
I have a picture, I'm not sure where it's at, but I have a picture of where Dr. France displayed all of the bones. Now, I'm talking minute bones too. I'm talking bones that are maybe a knuckle, things of that nature. I mean, it covers an entire conference type table. There's so many bones.
Okay. Wow, what an interesting case. And of course, he never talked.
No.
He's currently serving 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, I believe.
That's correct.
So is he a member, or did he run any quote unquote gang, or was it just a group of like relatives and friends that were just hanging out doing this stuff?
There was gang involvement. I don't recall off the top of my head if he was associated to a specific gang, because there's a couple down there. I do know that there were individuals that were associated to this investigation. I didn't talk about them, that played a role in some of this. Quite frankly, it is believed that Karina was murdered by Baroz as a hit. Karina had been an informant in a drug case. The individual that she was testifying against and providing information to law enforcement about reached out to a gang member in a local gang that had been known as an enforcer to get rid of Karina. The enforcer then reached out to Baroz, who actually took care of it. Karina was there to buy drugs, but Baroz also had been looking for her. And the information we have is that he killed her as part of a hit to get rid of Karina.
Okay.
As far as Baroz being involved in a particular gang, I can't remember.
Right. And I guess, is there investigations into this person who ordered the hit or that group or not, or do you know?
We had investigated it during the big investigation, and we were unable to find enough corroborating evidence to support that theory. One of the biggest things I think that we make a mistake in this profession is failing to do enough work on victimology. When you do victimology in a murder case, the only way you know it is from talking to other people, but you really got to get that victimology down packed, and you got to get a lot of information from that, because that's going to help direct you which way you need to go in your investigation. It's going to provide you with information that is just incredible. And it's the same thing with, if this was the right word, but suspect. You got to have that too. You got to know your suspect. You've got to have that information, the ins and outs for it. I really am of the opinion that if a person wants to talk, they're going to talk. The big thing is just, you got to be yourself, and you just got to listen. You got to let them talk. And the more information you have about your victim, and the more information you have about your suspect, I think the easier, or maybe you have a better opportunity of gaining information from that suspect in an interview than you would if you didn't have it.
Yes, I agree with that. And victimology, I was a criminal investigator for 20 years, and every time we got stumped, we always kind of went back to that victimology, and most of the time you got to have multiple sources too, not just one. Obviously you'll have family members like mother, father, or husband or wife tell you about them, but you need to get their friends. You need to get more than just one source for the victimology, and it always seems to come back to that to help solve a case. And of course, here you guys did a great job by pulling together and realizing that all of them had in common one person, except for maybe Shayla, who was just unfortunately in the wrong place at the wrong time. But yeah, they all had one guy in common, and that was our man Baroz.
We thank Gregg for being here today and chatting about this case.
Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who participated in this episode.
We want to hear from our listeners, so please email us at crimpodcast@thechicagoschool.edu. That's CRIMPODCAST at the Chicago CHICAGO School SCHOOL.edu.
This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters, with additional post services provided by Audio Photo Synthesis. I'd like to give a special shout out to her, because if it wasn't for her, this episode and all episodes would not be possible. So thank you so much, Amy. I'm J.R. Rainbolt, your host, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Be safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers or the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers or the Chicago School.